every English literacy lesson, as I will always aim to prioritize critical thinking. Next, we will look at resources. The most significant resource I have discovered in the academic literature is the ideas framework, developed by our major player, Peter Facioni. In this example, the unit I have set for my class is to write a story. This is a task that can be set for multiple year levels, and the content would depend on the year level's current content descriptors. This framework is broken up into 5 steps. The first step is to identify the problem and set priorities. This will develop the critical thinking skill of interpretation. The literature suggests that the skill of interpretation is best promoted by learning through questioning. In my classroom, this would be the stage where I would read an example of the type of story I want my students to write, consisting of an introduction of 2 characters, their context, a climactic problem that they face, and a resolution. At this stage, I would encourage the students to ask questions to help them interpret the example narrative, to interpret the different stages of the narrative, and then to interpret the context I will provide them with to begin the process of writing their own story. By beginning this process with a priority of interpretation through questioning, the class will be poised to engage further critical thinking skills as the unit progresses. It is important to set them off with the right priorities here, as it would be difficult and futile to try to get the class to engage their critical thinking midway through the writing process, as they would only be capable of delivering a subpar evaluation so late in the process. Depending on the grade, there are different ways that I could make this first stage engaging for the class, such as by asserting that for this unit we will be story detectives, where we will complete each stage and look at it critically like a detective. The next stage is to deepen understanding and gather relevant information. This develops the critical thinking skill of analysis. Many literary sources suggested that analysis is a kind of jumping off point to problem solving, and to afford students confidence in their decisions as they employ critical thinking in later stages. With my class, this is the stage where I would encourage my students to flesh out their characters and to really analyze why a character believes something or wants something. For this reason, it will be important that the example narrative that I give the class will contain characters with strong motivations based on their characteristics. There are plenty of children's story tropes which demonstrate this understanding. For example, a princess wanting something within her scope and context, such as to live like a normal girl for a day, or a turtle wanting to experience what it's like to see at a giraffe's eye level because it's never left the ground before. Reflecting on my placement experience last year, I believe that this stage of critical thinking was not prioritized enough in my teaching of a similar English unit, as the class ended up writing stories about very one-dimensional characters with motivations that had more to do with the individual students' fleeting interests than to do with the character's context. This is where I will need to be intentional about engaging the students with analysis in order to produce high-quality work that they can be proud of. The next stage in the framework is to enumerate options and to anticipate consequences. This step develops the skill of inference. The way I would put this step into action with my class would be to deviate from the idea of writing a story straight through like they might expect to do. Rather, I would teach this unit in such a way that they are required to develop multiple options for how the story could go, with different climactic points and different resolutions. This would encourage the students to anticipate consequences, as Facioni suggested, and as a way to stretch their expectations and force them to think in a way that is more critical than what they might have anticipated for this task. By doing this, the students will have adjusted expectations in other areas of their education, which will help with their engagement in their higher order thinking. This would be a good stage to do a lesson using the creative controversy model. I would have the class use the example story that I read to them at the start of the unit, and in groups they would debate for and against different ways that the story could go, and eventually settle on the best conclusion prior to writing multiple endings for their own stories. The next step is to assess the situation and make a preliminary decision, which will develop the class's evaluation skills. In the English literacy lesson, This means they will evaluate their work, including their decisions that they have made and specific words that they have chosen. This is a step that students may find boring or easy to skip, but again, bringing in the idea of being a story detective may encourage them to produce something of the same quality of the example story that they heard at the start of the unit. They will then be in a position to continue on with their own story, moving into the final stage, which is to scrutinize the process and self-correct if needed. This step encourages the critical skills of explanation and self-regulation. Practically, this means the students should be able to provide a justification for their chosen direction for their story and the words they have chosen to deepen the meaning of the story. This can be done in a few ways, such as a written justification that could be used as part of their assessment. Upon completion of this 5-step process, my class will have completed a much more intentional and enriching experience with writing a story than what they might have had if critical thinking was not a high priority of the unit. The skills that they will have developed in this unit are transferable to other subjects. So by choosing to teach the unit in this way, I would be establishing my teacher identity as one which understands and prioritizes critical thinking as the most important skill for students of the 21st century, as the literature suggested. Moving on to my key supports. My action plan includes the communications I will need to seek out in order to be able to adequately teach critical thinking to my students. One such key support would be a mentor who understands the importance of critical thinking in the classroom. This can be achieved by applying to work at schools which have implemented teacher mentoring programs, as this would be the most intentional way to start my teaching career. Another key support would be professional development sessions that would be provided through the schools I will work at. Further interactive learning opportunities would provide me with new avenues through which to teach my students to develop their interpretation, analysis, inference, evaluation, explanation, and self-regulation. Next, I will take you through the time frame for my action plan. It is comprised of 4 periods of time: the rest of this semester, next semester, the holidays before I start teaching, and my first year of teaching, which will be next year. Firstly, this semester I will need to continue to read literature which will develop my understanding of teaching critical thinking. Many of the sources I read indicated that there has not been enough study yet completed to formulate the kind of framework for critical thinking to be used on an Australia-wide basis or even a single school-wide basis. This means new research and insights are likely to emerge in the near future, and if this is to be a significant aspect of my teacher identity, I will need to stay informed about these new findings. Next semester, I will have my final placement before becoming a teacher. I need to ensure that the English literacy lessons I prepare hold a significant priority of critical thinking for the students. The former stages of my action plan will be utilised on my placement, including the ideas framework. Next semester, I will also need to maintain my goal of having critical thinking be a part of my teacher identity as I complete my remaining university courses. Then, during the holidays before my first year of teaching, I will create my teaching units by implementing the ideas framework and making sure to implement such strategies as debating, group discussions, cooperation, and brainstorming in my lesson plans. During the first year of teaching, I will connect with a mentor teacher and discuss with them the ways that I can enhance my understanding of teaching critical thinking to my class on a less theoretical and more practical level. In this first year of teaching, I will also take part in professional development opportunities about up-to-date teaching strategies. If this type of opportunity is not forthcoming within my school, I will seek it out externally to the school. Then I will seek feedback about my lessons from my mentor, the principal, and any colleagues who might have the opportunity to witness me teaching my class. And the final step will be to action this feedback, which I will aim to be an ongoing occurrence throughout my teaching career. And now the final stage is evaluation. As I evaluate my action plan, it is important that I have some kind of external standards against which I can measure my process. For this purpose, The Australian Curriculum website offers the Critical and Creative Thinking Learning Continuum. This continuum will allow me to check off grade-specific practical activities for identifying, exploring, and organizing information and ideas, generating ideas, possibilities, and actions, reflecting on thinking processes, and analyzing, synthesizing, and evaluating reasoning and procedure. The plan is that I will go through these criteria when I have meetings with my mentor to discuss ideas and ensure that I am on the right track. In doing this, I can also add to the criteria the additional strategies and resources that I have discovered through my research. Having this external list of criteria to report on will ensure that I am keeping to my action plan throughout my teaching practice, which will also develop my own critical thinking as I find new creative ways to develop my class's education in this way. So those are my findings and my literature-informed action plan. Thank you very much for listening and for your time. I would like to end with a quote from one of my academic sources. Education, understood in its real essence, is not merely imparting information to the learner, but to help the learner acquire and integrate knowledge. Education should concern itself as to how to use the knowledge in new and innovative ways for the welfare of society. Critical thinking is the process by which acquiring knowledge is applied to the new problems or situations in order to devise new solutions. This quote summarizes the reason that critical thinking is my top priority for all of my future teaching practice. Thank you.